Rimworld pawns. So fragile and weak. Wouldn't it be great to have the perfect pawn? Well, today we're going to look at what makes a pawn perfect and what you should keep a lookout for. Let's start with the basics. A pawn can look quite complicated at first. A pawn has health, skills, traits, and backstories. They all impact how a pawn will perform in his day-to-day life. These are critical, and we're going to focus on them to create our super soldier. Perhaps one of the most important parts of pawns are their traits. Traits can make pawns go from God tier to F tier. As this video focuses on combat, we're going to look out for combat traits. The first obvious trait that comes to mind is tough. It reduces all damage taken by 50%, no matter what your playstyle, stage of the game, and type of combat you use. Tough will always be useful without a doubt, as it will allow your pawn to take twice as much damage before going down and dying. Remember that this trait does nothing against infections and blood loss. The second best trait heavily depends on personal preferences, but we'd say Jogger is definitely one worthwhile to pick. It increases base movement speed by 0.4, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it stacks with bionics and drugs and allows you to outrun every human that doesn't have this trait. This is invaluable in moving to places quickly, running away from melee pawns, and kiting. Talking about melee pawns, you may want to consider equipping yourself with Nimble. It's similar to Tough, reducing incoming damage, but only from melee attacks. It increases your chance to dodge an attack by 15%, which is pretty significant. For your range pawns, Trigger Happy increases firing speed by 50%, but reduces accuracy by 5, giving them a weapon that does not heavily benefit from accuracy, such as grenades, or close-range weapons, like machine pistols can tremendously boost their damage output. Its counterpart, Careful Shooter, makes your pawn aim 25% slower with an increased accuracy. This is perfect for normal fights, as you'll generally have higher DPS than other pawns with the same weapons. The closer the target gets to you, and the higher your skill is, and the worse this trait gets mathematically compared to Trigger Happy. The decision is usually fairly simple. Between those two traits, under level 12, Careful Shooter is better, but after that, Trigger Happy becomes better assuming you aren't constantly fighting at maximum range. There are many other traits, but most only have a minor impact on a combat or simply boost a skill. Speaking of, time for skills, the main course of pawns. Thankfully, we only have 2 skills that are directly relevant and 1 indirectly relevant to combat. Shooting is the ability for a pawn to shoot a gun. Pretty easy to understand. Higher level means you will hit more bullets and have higher DPS. We're not going to go deep in the math, but you generally want lower skilled pawns using machine pistols and other low range weapons, while higher skilled pawns generally want assault rifles and sniper rifles. Charge rifles are also an acceptable substitute. Melee enhances every part of your pawn that deals with melee attacks. You will hit more often and dodge more melee attacks. All melee weapons have the same accuracy, so give whatever weapon you see fit to any high level of melee. Higher melee, however, you should have priority on better weapons. The last skill that impacts combat indirectly is medical. A good medic will keep your melee pawns patched up. Not every pawn needs to be a medic, but having more than one will be critical in tending to wounds, dealing with infections, and installing new limbs. All pawns have their starting skills and then their backstories. For most people, they are the same, but backstories can add additional skill levels and also disable skills entirely. So make sure your pawns aren't incapable of fighting, as those are considered by many to be more valuable as a hat than a colonist. The health of your pawn can make or break a deal. You might have found the best war veteran ever, but it doesn't matter if he's 90 years old with dementia and with a broken back. In general, broken limbs can be fixed, addictions can be healed, but brain-related injuries and diseases and frail are impossible to heal in vanilla, outside of a rare mech serums or a constant addiction to luciferium. I'd avoid those at all costs. And if they happen to one of your current colonists, you may want to discard him, depending on your situation. Now time to enhance our pawn to his absolute limit. we're going to assume a healthy, tough, and jogger pawn for this one, giving your pawn a standard set of bionics, including eyes, arms, and legs. We'll make him shoot more accurately, dodge more melee attacks, and move 30% faster than a normal pawn, on top of taking 50% less damage. This also has the added benefit of causing no bleeding on bionic part. Assuming no rare architect parts, which would only make these numbers get higher, this is as high as you can get without drugs. On the topic of drugs, let's discuss which one is relevant to combat. For convenience, we'll ignore taking multiple at once, as drug overdoses are real and can kill your pawn extremely easily. Go Juice is the top dog of all. It reduces pain felt by 90%, which essentially means your pawn will never get downed, only die. Keep in mind this does nothing for bleeding and infection, so be ready with a medic and medicine. Yep. The other effects of Go Juice include 20% consciousness, which is a net buff to movement speed and manipulation on top of the sight. A pawn on Go Juice will move 40% faster than our previous all bionic pawns, on top of getting huge buffs to accuracy. This comes at the cost of buying or manufacturing Go Juice and the possible addiction. Yayo is an acceptable substitute, but keep in mind it will only yield a fraction of the results. Luciferium, while not technically a combat drug, can also give you increased survivability on the field. Increased movement speed and manipulation can save someone's life easily. It also reduces pain and stacks with Go Juice. That's not to love. What's not to love? Okay, well, the reason why it's after Yayo is because of how impractical it is to use Luciferium at a larger scale for most players. While you can buy Luciferium from traders, you need a constant supply, which usually means caravanning around. Use at your own risk. Now that we have a pretty insane pawn, time to give him proper gear. Now, without DLCs, more on that later, the best we can do is legendary marine armor, which took in the testing 88 bullets from a legendary assault rifle to break and 91 bullets total to kill. Keep in mind, these do not account for missed bullets. A normal quality marine armor instead only took 21 direct shots to kill. Pretty pathetic, isn't it? For range pawns, we have multiple options. Assault rifles are generally the correct choice, with good range and good damage with decent armor piercing. Their main competitors, the charge rifle, lose 6 range but get 6 more damage, which is quite significant. The choice is yours, or which one you prefer, but they're both going to make your pawn a murder machine. Melee pawns are left in the dust without DLCs, as the best weapon is simply a uranium stick. I'm not kidding. The uranium mace does generally have the higher DPS compared to any other weapon due to blunt armor, generally lacking for every enemy, and the fact uranium boosts blunt damage by a lot. Another unique tool for melee pawns are shield belts, as they can add a large chunk of survivability. A legendary quality one will recharge very fast, leaving you relatively safe. If worse comes to worse, it will break, leaving you armor to do the dirty work. We've reached the peak a human can do in vanilla, but if we turn to DLCs, we can truly accomplish our dream of raising the ultimate human to rule them all. Royalty is the first DLC to look at, and it adds new bionics, weapons, and psychas to look at. The new bionics aren't exactly groundbreaking, but are very nice nonetheless. The pain blocker is pretty self-explanatory. It completely stops pain from affecting your pawn in any way, shape, or form. This means a pawn will only go down from his legs getting crippled, or particularly nasty brain injury. This will decrease the amount of downs you will ever see, but also might increase the amount of deaths, as pawns will fight until their last breath. The armor glands can all be useful if you want to take the trade-off of speed versus armor. The stonekin gland can be of drastic help, as it's comparable to wearing normal quality recon armor under your current armor. Royalty also adds a bunch of miscellaneous implants, such as the healing enhancer or coagulator, which help a lot with keeping yourself alive after the fight. Worth investing into if you already went this far for one pawn. For even more survivability, you may want to consider cataphract armor. Unfortunately, at this stage, we're reaching the armor cap for one layer, and legendary cataphract will only be a small improvement in armor, with a much higher hit on movement speed. Legendary marine armor will have 190% sharp, which is only 10% lower for a reduction in movement speed of 300% compared to marine armor. While this sounds pretty bad on paper, it's highly unlikely that you will have all your pawns wear legendary gear, and cataphract armor is vastly superior to marine under Legendary. The new weapons from Royalty are plain upgrades from anything in Vanilla. We'll assume you're, as per usual, trying to reach Legendary and Persona weapon. The Plasma Sword has fairly low damage, but sets enemies on fire. It can leave enemies vulnerable to gunfire as they run out of cover, but the other options are usually superior. The Mono Sword is the king of sharp damage, as it completely ignores armor and deals insane damage. Meanwhile, the Zeus Hammer also pretty much ignores armor, but deals EMP damage on his target and deals blunt damage. Generally, Zeus Hammers are better as their attacks will spread if they overkill. While the Mono Sword might chop a finger off, the Zeus Hammer will smash the entire arm. Honestly, as long as you can get yourself a Persona weapon, it will drastically outperform anything else, no matter the type. For non-Persona weapons, they are plain worse than Persona weapons, but the same logic still applies. This is the best melee gear is going to get with DLCs and vanilla, so enjoy your completely overpowered setup and go smash and slice centipedes like nobody's business. If you don't believe in hard, cold, hard steel, how about some magic? Psycast can be acquired either through the Animatree, quest rewards, and royalty titles. Psy trainers also exist, but you will need the required level of Psylink to use them. For any Psycasters, prestige armor and the psychically hypersensitive trait is never a bad idea, as it will directly buff your Psycaster. Eltex gear is also available, but leaves your pawn lacking in armor and very vulnerable to attacks. There isn't a bad Psycast in Rimworld. They all have some pretty good utility in combat. We'll name some of the better ones here. Berserker Pulse is probably the best defensive Psycast, capable of turning a group of enemies berserk for a short duration. It is very easy to use, targets a fairly large area, and works on mechs. Very useful, especially in kill boxes where pawns get packed very close to each other. Invisibility is another S+ tier Psycast, capable of turning a pawn essentially immortal for the duration of the Psycast. Pawns will not retaliate in melee, range pawns will not target them, and turrets will not lock on. Keep in mind, stray bullets and explosives can still hit them. Skip, while tricky to use, is a formidable tool to any colony. Skip can teleport wounded pawns back to safety, teleport enemies out of cover or into your melee pawns, and even teleport shells out of sieges. It's definitely hard to use, but completely worth it if you can get used to it. Another small tip for you, Go Juice restores 15% Psy focus, making it an even more valuable choice for Psy casters. Yeah, I almost said Psy trainers. Yeah, no, Psy casters. The last aspect of royalty that can buff a pawn are permits. Acquired from royalty titles, you will eventually amass 5 permit points, giving you progressively better and better abilities. The actual choice is up to you, but generally resource drops are not very good, and you're better off picking the utility and combat related permits. Now that we've equipped our pawn in dashing gear and magical power, time to empower him with the power of ideology. There's no beneficial memes in ideology to give us a combat advantage, but some memes give access to powerful roles, buffing our pawns even more. The first role you'll probably access is your leader. He comes with a powerful combat command ability, giving a minor buff to shooting and melee accuracy. It'll last 1 in-game day on a 1-week cooldown. The second role you may choose really depends on your preferences, as you have the melee specialist and the shooting specialist, which both boost their respective class. Biotech is next on the chopping block, and it's a big one. We are not going to mention Mechanitors, as we have our own guide on the subject right here, but instead have genes to play around, and there's a lot to talk about. We are going to show you a suggestion of the peak, the best soldier the Rim has ever seen. We don't expect you to get all the way there due to the sheer cost and complexity of these xenotypes, so think of this as a list of useful genes to acquire. Before we begin, a good amount of these xenotypes are only found in exotic goods traders, so keep a lookout for those. Remember, you can always ask your allies to send you a trade caravan of your choice. The first step will only include basic genes that should fit any soldier, without going with rare genes or specific cases. This super soldier includes all the obvious combat genes you could think of, with the main drawback being the lack of other skills. This pawn is good at one job, and one job only, and it's to kill and stay alive as long as possible. This being the most basic tier, we got all the most obvious combat skills, such as robust and very fast runner. Keep in mind some skills only apply to melee fighters, while others only apply to ranged fighters. Some of you may question the use of go juice dependency. While it might seem like a straight downside requiring constant intake of go juice, it also completely prevents overdosing on go juice, making it quite practical. We're also using it to make the xenotype incredibly stable at a whopping +4. Our next step in developing the beast is to add archetype genes. Due to them adding stability, we can actually add a few more genes on top of our super soldier to give some good utility. We now have a ton of new abilities to use in battle and a lot more survivability from the deathless. Super clotting and super fast wound healing on top of keeping our metabolic efficiency relatively low. All of this amounts to an incredible pawn for fighting purposes, but he isn't quite perfect yet. We can go deeper. You may have realized we were ignoring vampire-related genes, so let's include them. This gives us even more tools to work with, as we now have even more efficiency to add a few minor buffs, such as a smooth tail and elongated fingers for some increased manipulation. Death Rest might not be your first choice, but the buffs it gives are massive. The various upgrades you can attach to it can drastically upgrade your pawn's abilities. The one you choose depends on your needs, but the glucosoid pump is a good place to start. This pawn is in every way a killing machine, capable of dishing a lot more damage than any normal pawn could in any situations, and stay alive in the most dire of times. But all of this comes at a cost, and quite a heavy one. Not only would you need a setup similar to what's shown on screen, but you also need to spend thousands of silver buying all the genes, and I really do mean thousands upon thousands upon thousands. Oh, and years extracting the genes. This is why we again recommend to only use this as a list of useful genes and not as a complete package. Our hero has worked hard enough. It's time to offer him something else than combat. So how about love? While high mates cannot fight, they can give a respectable buff to their lover, so make sure to get your super soldier in a relationship with one. Anomaly is the final toy that we got to play with, and it doesn't really add anything new for our demigod besides serums and a few buffs around, so let's dive into it. Taking the path of a mad scientist will prove to be beneficial on this one, as siding with the void will grant you many powers. There are tons of helpful abilities for combat, but they are quite rare. Look around for creep joiners, but keep in mind they usually come with problems. You can also kidnap cultist members. We'll list a few abilities, but this video is already long enough, so let's get over the major ones. The Inhumanization trait reduces pain, giving us a direct boost in combat at low cost. It's very common on cultist raids and can be acquired through rituals. Siding with the void and Anomaly ending will also grant you a special health condition, giving you 4 charges of death refusal and ghoul perks while staying completely human. D&D anyone? This is without saying a phenomenal ability to any pawn. Past any fancy spells, we have even more drugs to consume. Fantastic, isn't it? We're obviously talking about serums. There's only 2 that can benefit us, so let's look into them. The first combat serum is the Juggernaut serum, giving your pawn more movement speed, faster healing, and even more melee damage. These DLCs really have a habit of buffing melee, huh? Metal Blood is the second serum you can grab. It halves the damage taken from everything but fire, where it instead quadruples the damage. Toasty. Ha! Make sure to give your pawn Devil Strand gear or Phoenix armor to protect yourself from the flames. So we've reached the end of the road, and how far have we come? We have Simberto here. He is using all of the methods we described earlier. He now moves 5 times faster, takes over 5 times less damage, and has huge mood buffs from the Void. He's also equipped with an array of abilities to use thanks to his Psycast powers and Biotech genes. This lets him have a ton of options when it comes to range combat despite being melee. As for his gear, only the finest Cataphract armor and Zeus hammer for him. On top of this, Archotech limbs and bionic organs. We're going to play a clip here of him going on a rampage against the vampire. Empire, my bad. Just look at this, it's ridiculous. That was something. Anyways, this is as far as it's going to get, folks. We've reached the peak. If we happen to miss anything, let us know in the comments down below. I'd like to thank everybody that makes videos like this possible, all of our Patreons that support us, all our channel members that support us, and again, thank you to everyone that helped us get to 100,000. I know we haven't been posting as often as normal. Things have been kind of rough over here. I've been dealing with issues with my mood and stuff, and just trying to feel better in general. So I appreciate everybody's support with that, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time.